Greetings. This is Muertos, and this is my first podcast. I've actually wanted to do a podcast for quite a while now. I've had some people I know suggest that I do it, and I've never really gotten it together before. I haven't really found a place to host it, or I don't really know that much about it. But now this week is, of course, the week between Christmas and New Year's, so it's pretty slow, and I have a little bit of time, and because it is the end of the year, I thought it might be appropriate just to do as a first podcast kind of a roundup of year-end 2011, specifically related to my blog. If you haven't been to my blog, it's muertos.blog.com. It's just muertos.blog.com. You can follow me on Twitter as well. My handle is Muertos, MUERTOS, and I will post a lot of material from my blog there as well, and some related stuff as well. So if you're listening to this, you probably already know who I am, or have at least heard of me. So anyway, 2011, very interesting year, and a lot of things going on. I blog about a lot of different things. I blog about movies and history and books, politics, things like that. But I guess the thing I'm probably most well known for are my blogs related to conspiracy theories, debunking conspiracy theories. I am a skeptic of conspiracy thinking, and many of my blog posts, particularly the more important or more popular blog posts during 2011, were related to those subjects. But that's not all I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about some other things too. Because I kind of, and for 2012, I kind of want to do a little bit less debunking and a little bit more of some other subjects that I've neglected. But certainly the conspiracy angle was one of the more important things happening on my blog during 2011. And as you may have noticed, 2011 was a really bad year for conspiracy theorists. A couple of different things happened. In April, Obama released his long-form birth certificate, which immediately quashed the whole birther controversy. Of course, the conspiracy theory that he was secretly born in Kenya. Not long after that, actually, Osama bin Laden was assassinated on Obama's orders by military forces of the United States in Pakistan. And I think that brought a lot of closure, at least psychological closure, to the whole 9/11 issue for a lot of people. Certainly it did me. It was very emotional for me to finally have that closure that I remember being so angry and shocked on the day of 9/11. And it was very gratifying to see that justice, some type of justice, was done to Osama bin Laden at the end. So also in 2011, and I think related to September 11th, of course, one of the key conspiracy theories that's still out there is there was a lot of decline in interest in 9/11 generally. I think during 2011, it was the 10th anniversary, and certainly, I think the experience of the 10th anniversary shows just that the 9/11 truth movement is basically dead. It's no longer like 2005, 2006, where you had Alex Jones out at Ground Zero with a bullhorn shouting conspiracy theories at people. You just don't see that anymore, and I think that's a very positive development. Of course, also, if you read my blog, you will have noticed that 2011 saw the decline, most likely terminal decline, of what I call the conspiracy cults, those being the Zeitgeist movement and Desteni. Both of which occupied a lot of real estate on my blog this year. But I want to just kind of go through some of the old posts that I made over the course of the year. Starting, I guess, technically, I did some posts at the very end of December last year, 2010. But I did them exactly a year ago this week, and I think three of my favorite blogs that I've ever done and they were specifically about Whitley Strieber and his communion books. If you don't know who Whitley Strieber is, just to refresh you, he was a former horror novelist, and in the 1980s he made the claim that he was abducted by aliens from his cabin in upstate New York. And, you know, the standard drill, now what is considered the standard drill of alien abduction stories. You had the invasive probes and the mind wipes and the missing time and all of those types of things that we're so used to hearing. But in the 80s, Whitley Strieber was the first person to really come out with these stories in a mainstream way in his book called Communion, which was published in 1987. I chose to do a blog about Communion for two reasons. First, I was a great fan of these books when they first came out in the 80s. I was 14 when Communion first came out. I remember reading it, loving it. Of course, I was not yet a conspiracy theorist, but I certainly did believe in a lot of speculative things at that time in my life that I no longer believe in. And in fact, it was my experience reading the Communion books over the course of many years. He did two sequels. He did Transformation in 1988 and a book called Breakthrough, much less well-known, in 1994. Each of them, as my blog show, got increasingly outlandish, his claims increasingly bizarre, and naturally he did not provide any evidence that these abductions were actually happening. Most of the books concern his thoughts on the spiritual implications of these abductions, and he makes a big deal out of claiming that these aliens are trying to help the human race break through to a higher level of consciousness and things like that, which are obviously very subjective. But as far as the objective fact of was he abducted by non-human creatures or not, he never provided any proof. And in fact, his story changed, and it changed over the course of time. At first, in the original book Communion, Whitley Strieber was not actually even willing to make the claim that what he called the visitors were a physical reality. And in my blog, I deal with the implications of that. Does that mean that he agrees that they don't exist? You know, what does that really mean? Later on, he backed off on that claim and started to embrace pretty explicitly the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And naturally, Whitley Strieber is now quite well associated with UFO-related subjects for obvious reasons. He's still out there. He's running a website called Unknown Country, unknowncountry.com. He's still maintains the veracity of his stories, but his association with Art Bell, late night radio talk show host, also who trafficked in conspiracy theories, kind of a defanged version of Alex Jones, I guess you'd say, so sort of a harmless Alex Jones. But in any event, my blogs kind of went into the depths of these three books, which are very, very interesting. And if you don't have time to read the books, and there's no reason why you would, do check out the blogs, because there's some really interesting stuff there. A debate in the comments on one of these blogs about alien implants turned out to be very interesting. Evidently, some of these blogs were brought to, I know at least one of them was linked on Whitley Strieber's YouTube page, and his fans predictably shouted it down as, you know, disinformation and those other wonderful things that I'm so often accused of being. So those were some of my really favorite blogs from the last year, those three. January, there really wasn't that much happening, at least on my blog. In the conspiracy underground, of course, January 2011, the very tragic shooting of Gabrielle Giffords, congresswoman from Arizona, by Jared Lee Loughner, who, as it came out, and as you probably know, his worldview was very heavily influenced. I mean, he's clinically insane, certainly, but his worldview and his motivation for attacking political figures was very heavily influenced by two movies. And the two movies were Loose Change, about the 9/11 conspiracy theories, and Zeitgeist, the movie. And as you may recall, I didn't do a blog on it specifically, but certainly mentioned in other parts of my blogs. The reaction of the Zeitgeist movement to the Gifford shooting was just appalling, in my opinion. They seem to take the tack that no press, there's no such thing as bad press. Of course, that's just not true. But the Giffords incident certainly dampened the release of the second sequel to Zeitgeist called Zeitgeist Moving Forward, which is a pretty much major flop, seen by very, very few people as compared to the viral popularity of the first film. But kind of another signpost on the decline of this organization. I did do a blog in February kind of related to the issue of violence and its relationship to the Zeitgeist movement. Douglas Mallet, who is no longer associated with the Zeitgeist movement or the Venus Project, very good decision on his part, in my opinion, but when he was still associated with these organizations, some comments came to light that he'd made actually several months before about in which he claimed that anyone who attacked a resource-based economy installation, a farm or whatever, should be annihilated, should be wiped off the face of the earth. He used some very strong words, which he later retracted, and I kind of used this incident to show, and my blog was, I did an update on this blog. The blog is called Disturbing Words, but most disturbing, I think, to me was in the update I did to that blog, where I looked at some of the comments posted on Mallet's YouTube page by Zeitgeist supporters, comments to his blog in which he apologized for saying these things. And the comments were just chilling, absolutely chilling. And it seemed that many of those who felt motivated to comment felt that he didn't do anything wrong, and in fact doubled down on some of this violent rhetoric that was coming out of these people, to the effect that, yes, people who don't understand the Zeitgeist movement, will get what they deserve in the end, and things like that, very disturbing things. And obviously you can't help getting around the elephant in the room in a situation like that, which is, of course, the Gifford shooting. So that did come up, and that was February. In March, I did actually 2 blogs in March, and one of them totally non-conspiracy related. Again, one of my more favorite blogs. It's an advice blog about Twitter, about how to be a historical figure on Twitter. There are a lot of historical people pretending to be historical figures on Twitter. You can find them very easily, and a lot of these accounts are really amusing. There's Henry VIII on Twitter. There's Thomas Jefferson. There's a couple that I follow. John Adams, President John Adams, very, very funny. Dwight Eisenhower, very funny. And as I follow these people on Twitter, I began to notice some things that they did right, some things that I thought they did wrong, and so I wrote a blog with some advice for people who want to be historical figures on Twitter. I also, just full disclosure, I have a Twitter account, a historical Twitter account called Cry for Byzantium, and I'm presenting the history of the Byzantine Empire in a series of tweets in chronological order. That's a big project beyond the scope of my blog, which is why you won't really see much about it on my blog, but I do that's where my qualifications are, I think, to the extent you need qualifications to spout an opinion on how to do Twitter. But check out my blog about that. It's actually very funny. My main points were basically commit. If you're going to be Henry VIII on Twitter, you got to commit, because all the best names are already taken, and I can guarantee you the person who has the Twitter handle Henry VIII, Roman numeral VIII, is no longer tweeting. So just as a courtesy to the people who come after you, particularly if you have a good historical name on Twitter that people are going to find you through, please stick to the program. Stick to your persona. Actually tweet. Don't just kind of go away after a couple of tweets. Also, stick to your persona. Stay in character. Engage with people. Twitter's a conversation. People like to laugh. Things like that. In April, of course, the big news again was Zeitgeist movement, and the news was the public divorce, as I called it, between the Zeitgeist movement and the Venus Project. My blog was called Civil War in Utopia, my thoughts on the schism in the Zeitgeist movement. And I basically made the point that there was a high-profile split between Peter Joseph Merola, the leader of the Zeitgeist cult, and the Venus Project, which is the social neo-utopian idea that they believed they were trying to work toward, basically circular cities and robots ruling the world, things like that. That was run by a gentleman named Jacques Fresco, a very elderly man in his 90s, who came out and said that Peter Joseph Merola didn't know anything, and he was not educated on the tenets of the Venus Project, and there was basically the split was pretty much caused by money and by egos. They had conflicting goals for fundraising, and neither of them could grant the other one really any wiggle room, so they split. And this was, of course, a large big deal within the Zeitgeist movement. Left the Zeitgeist movement essentially rudderless, without really anything to do, anything to agitate for, anything to pin their hopes on anymore. And it's become basically, as I predicted in that blog, and I believe the prediction has come true, that it's become basically sort of a fan club for Merola and his films, and really very little else than that. There's still opinions going around about that, and that's fine, and probably will. But it's very clear, at least at this point, that Zeitgeist and Venus Project are permanently estranged. In May was the first appearance on my blog of another conspiracy cult called Desteni, spelled Desteni. This is a very bizarre organization run out of South Africa by ex-cop and evidently a supporter of Adolf Hitler, a man named Bernard Pohlmann. And Bernard Pohlmann is a very shadowy figure, appears to be very scary. And the main thrust of Desteni, it is a cult, and I realize that there is a divergence of opinion on whether or not the Zeitgeist movement is a cult. My view on whether they are changed, in fact, during 2011. At first I thought they were not, and then I thought that Zeitgeist's behavior after the Gifford shooting really pushed them into the realm of cultdom in kind of a way that perhaps cults have not yet been understood as being on the internet centered. But Desteni, clearly, you will have basically no argument that Desteni is not a cult. It clearly is. Its members shave their heads. They spout strange New Age philosophy, very authoritarian structure. They give their money to Bernard Pohlmann through a pyramid scheme, a multi-level marketing scheme called the Desteni Eye process, which was the subject of a blog that I posted in June, which was called Desteni Eye Process, Amway for conspiracy theorists. But the conspiracy angle of Desteni is they use conspiracy theories as a recruiting tool, and Zeitgeist did this to an extent as well. But Desteni really, it was really the main, one of their main squeezes, and one of the main things that they did, one of the key unifying beliefs among the Desteni members is belief in reptilians. Not exactly the same worldview as David Icke and his reptoids, Icke-tillions as I call them. Absolutely ridiculous conspiracy theory that the world is ruled by shape-shifting reptilian aliens, which that conspiracy theory is a redress, modern science fiction redress of the old Jewish world conspiracy theories of the 1890s, early 1900s. Basically, if you cross out the word Jew and put in reptilian shape-shifting aliens, everything else is the same. Supposedly they run the banks and they drink the blood of children and these various things. A lot of people in Desteni believe these, or similar variants of this. There was evidently, I did find an interesting reference that Desteni had tried to get David Icke to endorse them in some fashion, could not do that, so they kind of tried to do to get away from that. But my investigation of Desteni, and you can follow it look on the blogs for May and June particularly, and you'll see an investigation of the conspiracy theories and how they use them, the investigation of the pyramid scheme, the multi-level marketing scam, and their enemies list, which I ended up on Destiny's enemies list within 2 weeks. It took me 8 months to get on Zeitgeist Movement's enemies list. Yes, Zeitgeist Movement does have an enemies list, something they probably won't tell you. One of Destiny's spokesmen, a fellow named Daryl Thomas, who I believe lives in South Africa, actually struck back with a blog devoted specifically to me called Deconstructing Muertos Daily. He only updated it a few times, which I found rather disappointing. Most of his responses were incomprehensible, or at least extremely arcane. But I invite you to look at that blog, and you can see another viewpoint. It's very strange. And that URL is Deconstructing Muertos Daily. That's all one word, .wordpress.com. It hasn't been updated in months, as I said. So in June, I did a blog on a book called The Looming Tower, which is not specifically about 9/11 conspiracy theories, but I did it because for two reasons. First, because it was a fascinating history of Al-Qaeda, of the terrorism, the rise of terrorism, modern terrorism as we know it, and efforts by Western governments to combat these groups. Very fascinating book, won a Pulitzer Prize. Lawrence Wright was the author. Again, it's called The Looming Tower. Came out about, I think, 2006, 2007. Wonderful book. But this does have a connection, I think, to conspiracy theories, because it shows that there is a world of knowledge out there that's invisible, completely invisible, to believers in conspiracy theories. They generally do not assimilate any information that you can't find on Google or YouTube, so actually going to a library and checking out a book on the history of Al-Qaeda is not something that a 9/11 truther is going to do in most cases. So there is this other world really out there of where, and that's where the meat of history and scholarship is. Of course, I'm a historian, and I've made this point several times, that the world that you see on the internet is extremely narrow, extremely shallow, and absolutely not indicative at all of the type of knowledge and history that is really out there. In August, I did a blog about politics, about the early August. This was the debt ceiling deal. It's called The Death of Compromise, Why I Support a Deal I Hate. And my main point in that blog, it was about, of course, the debt ceiling deal between President Obama and Congress. And my main point was that, and I don't know that a lot of people would disagree with this, that I think we should get back to a political climate where political compromise is accepted and valued, where throughout most of American history it has been. We have so many great compromises in our history, the compromise to create the Constitution, for example, or the compromise of 1850, things like that we really need to get back to that. Starting in August, I really wanted to ramp down anything about the conspiracy cults, and I had hoped, just about every blog I did throughout the summer, I remember sitting there writing it and thinking, I hope this is my last blog about these people. But they continue to do things, or things happen to them or involving them, that just make it impossible to stand still and not say something that occurred in August. I did a blog called Disturbing Words, and it was about comments made on the Zeitgeist Movement forum to the effect that members of the Zeitgeist Movement should go around and kill the quote-unquote elite, should destroy them in order to prevent them from wreaking more havoc in the world. This was a comment made by someone which engendered a tremendous amount of support from mainstream Zeitgeist members, including the chapter, the head of one of the chapters. Merola himself got involved in this and said that the thread was deleted from the forum, but he said that it should not have been deleted, that there was nothing wrong with what was said. Very disturbing, just kind of harking back to Doug Mallett's statements back in February, so I had to do a post on that. And that post itself, that blog, engendered another blog, where there was a podcast done by Peter Joseph Merola, the leader of the Zeitgeist Movement, in which he stated, or actually it wasn't a podcast, I believe it was a posting on his forum, where he stated that the quote-unquote trolls, meaning the people who criticized the Zeitgeist Movement, were paid to do so, and it was very clear that he was talking about me, as well as James Cush and others who criticized the Zeitgeist Movement. And this just astonished me that a person of the erudition and, well, I won't say official erudition, but the articulateness and intelligence of Peter Merola would actually make the claim that his critics are only criticizing him because they're paid to do so. So in my blog, published in August, called The Nadir of Paranoia, I challenged Mr. Merola to come forth with the evidence he claims he has that I am paid to do what I do. Naturally, there has not been any, no one has taken me up on that challenge. I've seen not a shred of evidence that anyone has produced that I'm paid to do what I do. And in fact, in that blog, I explain quite clearly that no, I'm not paid to do this. This is a hobby for me. This is not what This is nothing to do with the government. This has nothing to do with my job. This is nothing. I'm just an ordinary citizen, and I happen to be very interested in what I call forms of organized deception, scams, cults, conspiracy theories. I've always been fascinated by those, and with the flourishing of those types of things on the internet, I think it's very important actually to push back against things like that. So that was a very interesting blog. In fact, later on, after the blog was published, Merola, this is what happened. He made a podcast, broadcast on his internet radio program, in which he doubled down on the accusation that critics of the Zeitgeist movement were in fact paid to be critics. In fact, the accusation was made against me that I not only am I paid to do this, but I have a staff, a full-time staff, whose job is to help me criticize the Zeitgeist movement. And it's astonishing to me that someone could actually believe this. It's so far out there that someone says something like that to you and you just don't, it just doesn't sink in. It's so bizarre, so bizarre. So that was a very interesting situation. And I think I'm kind of butting up against the end of my time here, so I'm going to continue on with the discussion of my blogs in the second podcast, which is coming up in just a moment. So stay tuned, click on to part 2, and thanks for listening. Hi, this is Muertos, and this is part 2 of my 2011 year-end wrap-up related to my blog. The first part I went through some of the highlights of things that I found interesting about that I wrote about during 2011, and I stopped in August, and my last, well, not my last post, but one of my last posts on the I guess it was my last post on Desteni, came in late August of 2011, called Destini's Bad Month. This was a rather infamous blog post called, Desteni Has Had a Bad Month. And August was a bad month for this cult. On August 9th, they were banned from YouTube, and if you have to read my previous blogs on them to understand why this was such a big deal, because YouTube was their main recruiting portal. Mainly what the Desteni people, they call themselves Destonians, mainly what they did was they would all join YouTube and make lots of videos spouting incomprehensible philosophy, but YouTube was the main interface between the cult members and the leadership. Bernard Pullman, the very strange, reclusive South African ex-policeman, who has said some supportive things about Adolf Hitler, and there's been some anti-Semitic things that have been attributed to him as well. In general, rather scary guy, and he would make these videos. You can't see them anymore, but you'd had to see them to believe them. They're so unbelievably strange. He would never show his face, but he would instead have this monster, this cartoon monster avatar, this very frightening looking thing, and he would opine on various things, life, the universe, and everything in his strange South African accent. And you'd hear a lot of these YouTube videos are made in his car, so you could hear like the sound of the engine and the turn signal going and things like that. It was really very, Very bizarre. But in August, YouTube banned Poolman and banned the official Destiny channels, specifically for violation of their terms of service, because they pushed the multi-level marketing scheme. That was the scam that I blogged about in May. Was it May? Or it was June, excuse me, June. But they were running a multi-level marketing scheme, which is actually, multi-level marketing is legal in the United States, at least in most places, but it is actually illegal in South Africa, which I didn't know when I began my investigation of Destiny. I've since found that to be true. You'll see in my blogs about Destiny, I give them the benefit of the doubt and say that I suspect it may be legal in South Africa. Well, I'm told now that it's not. So Destiny was banned from YouTube, and then they tried to get back on another video service, Vimeo. Vimeo banned them even quicker. And the Destonians themselves went absolutely berserk at this. They mounted a spam campaign to try to bring down YouTube. Poolman himself made a video in which he claimed that Destiny members should go around YouTube and flag as inappropriate any video they didn't like for any reason whatsoever, regardless of whether it violates terms of service. So he was evidently hoping to marshal his followers to take down YouTube. Not very successful, as you can imagine. I made the prediction in my blog that the banning from YouTube might well be a stake in the heart for the cult, that it would shrink down, that their communications, their main method of communication would be disrupted, and that seems to have been the effect. Destiny has really fallen off the radar screen since August. They've been unsuccessful at getting their videos back on YouTube or anywhere else where they're going to be seen. But even Vimeo, if they were able to do that, I think they would have taken a huge hit, since it's just simply not as popular as YouTube. There's just not the coverage there. Reading the Rick Ross forum, which has a long thread about Destiny, I understand that the core membership of Destiny is now less than 100 people worldwide, which is very good news. And it's interesting that a group of a mere 100 people got something like 5 or 6 different blog entries dedicated to them on my blog during 2011. Perhaps another reason why I kind of want to get away from debunking. I think I tend to exaggerate the importance of some of these groups, particularly when they're on the downswing. But we'll get to that in just a moment when we start talking about Thrive. But anyway, what made this particular blog infamous was Daryl Thomas, spokesman for Destiny, went absolutely nuts in a blog post on his own blog against me, specifically calling me a white supremacist and various other unflattering things, which is completely ridiculous. Of course, anyone who knows me knows that I am absolutely not racist in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I speak out quite strongly against racist statements. That's one of the reasons why I debunk conspiracy theories, because many of them have a racist undertone. But Daryl Thomas had some very unflattering things to say, and promptly dropped off the radar screen after he said them. So Destiny, I believe, is pretty much dead. You do occasionally still see their followers pop up on YouTube with their own channels, but there's no real central control anymore beyond the very small core group that gives money to Bernard Poolman actively, and is active with him on the ranch in South Africa where he's rumored to hole up, etc. So I think it's unlikely, barring something else, it's unlikely that there's going to be much more Destiny material on my blog really ever, unless their fortunes really change, which I seriously doubt. In September, I did a totally non-conspiracy blog about Return of the Jedi. If you have heard my opinion on movies, you may know that this is a particular sticky point with me. I really don't like this film. I think it completely bastardizes the Star Wars franchise. And my occasion for doing this blog was, of course, the release of a new video version Of course, George Lucas had to tweak it again, and the tweak in this point in time was when toward the end of the film, where Darth Vader throws the Emperor into the chasm, he added on the soundtrack Vader screaming "No!" very much in the same way of the laughable exclamation at the end of Revenge of the Sith, which Lucas just doesn't seem to get it, that his fans really do have occasionally something good to say about. I realize it's totally his baby, it's totally his franchise, but Vader screaming no as he scoops up the Emperor and throws him into the pit just seems a little bit beyond the pale. But that's the least of the problems of Return of the Jedi. You can read my my blog, which is not very popular, I might add, and read about my other opinions on that film. October, I couldn't help but do a blog about the Occupy Wall Street movement and some historical lessons that I drew from studying civil rights movement, particularly in the 1940s and 50s, and various other protest movements, that I identified a number of key characteristics that I think you need in order to have a successful protest movement. Occupy Wall Street had none of them. And I stated in the blog that I thought this was unfortunate, because I really do sympathize with the overall, I guess, I won't say goals, but I guess feeling of the Occupy Wall Street movement. And I think most people do. I do believe that our economic system is fundamentally broken, and our political system is certainly not helping things. I don't think the political system should be trashed in any way, shape, or form, nor the economic system, but I think it both can stand some serious reform. But Occupy Wall Street is not the way to go about it, at least not in the way that they went about it. I did this blog in part just obviously to kind of give a historical perspective on Occupy Wall Street, but also a lot of conspiracy theorists simply assumed that I would be anti-Occupy Wall Street. Generally, if you push back against conspiracy theories, they're going to call you a shill, sheeple, disinformation agent, that you love everything the government does, etc., etc. So, and that's really not true. And as I made the point in my blog, there are a lot of things. It's difficult not to sympathize with Occupy Wall Street, and I think that's very clear, but that's a very far cry from actively expecting that they're going to accomplish anything, which I think now, as of December going into January, I think it's clear that all the effects that they've had are going to be indirect at best. Many of them we can't really see what they're going to be, but they certainly did not accomplish anything directly. I did two actually companion blogs in October and November called Embracing Reason, and these came in over the transom. There were some emails that came in from former conspiracy theorists. The first was an email that had been forwarded to me by some people from Conspiracy Science, now called Skeptic Project, from a former 9/11 truther who stated that he was actually very pleased, he was able to make use of the information on that site, including some things that I had written, in getting away from 9/11 truth, and realizing that these theories are self-destructive and totally unsupportable. And it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful to see this. Someone thank you, because when you debunk conspiracy theories, you get a lot of flack, a lot of hatred, negativity thrown in your direction by people who really are very caught up in these theories and can't stand the idea that not everyone believes them. So it's nice to get some positive feedback for a change. And it was interesting that this occurred, because this email came in and I did this blog about the time that I really started to get tired of debunking. I mean, I've been at this for 5-6 years now, month after month, and I won't say that nothing ever changes, because of course clearly things do change, but I think I've done just about all the good that I am realistically going to be able to do, and there's other subjects I would like to talk about, but a lot of the people who read my blog read it mainly for these articles, and so of course I'm mindful of talking about subjects that people want to hear about. So, and I still do have a very strong interest in debunking I think I can probably do it a little bit more deftly and with a lighter tread in the future, and that's a goal of mine to do that, because I think kind of getting out of the arena and getting more into the press box, I think, is kind of where I'd like to go with debunking in 2012. We'll see if that's able to happen, particularly with the silly Mayan calendar end of the world catastrophes that are being predicted and are certainly going to ramp up about a year from now. November was the second part of that two-part blog called Embracing Reason, and this one was an email directed at me specifically from a former supporter of the Zeitgeist movement. Now, this blog was very interesting because the main point of my blog was to present the text, with the person's permission, of course, of the email to me, explaining why he got out of the Zeitgeist movement and why he found debunking material about the Zeitgeist movement very helpful to him. I think I made a mistake with this blog because I said before I began the text, presenting the text of the email, I made the statement that I thought the Zeitgeist movement was dead or dying, or largely dead, something to that effect. And that is fact. I mean, I do believe that. I think the Zeitgeist movement is pretty much finished. Stick a fork in them, because they're basically done. But when this blog was, this particular blog was reblogged on a blog called Zeitgeist Movement Exposed, run by a fellow named James Cush, who I don't know. I've emailed him a few times, but I don't know him. But he presents a lot of Zeitgeist debunking material, and he's kind of a clearinghouse for a lot of that type of material around the net. So he reposted my blog, and the comments, there were over 30 or maybe 40 comments eventually posted on this blog, and the main topic of discussion was, is the Zeitgeist movement dead? And I think that was kind of missing the point, because yes, I made that statement, but of course some supporters of the Zeitgeist movement who didn't even bother to read the blog, they merely read the small excerpt of it that appeared on James Cush's blog, and then went off on saying, no, the Zeitgeist movement isn't dead, we're still, blah, blah, blah. And I had to chime in on the comments on Cush's blog and say, look, the point of this was really why people step away from the Zeitgeist movement, why they don't believe this anymore, and why they're happy to get out of it. That was the real thrust of this blog, and eventually the rest of the text was reproduced on the blog, so that did come to light. But that was I thought that was very interesting how that was spun in a certain way. So November came Thrive, and there's no way I can't not talk about Thrive, because in simple terms of page views, the far and away most popular post on my blog this year came in November, and it was called The Next Conspiracy Film, or The Next Conspiracy Movie, the trailer for Thrive Debunked. And of course, Thrive is a new conspiracy theory film created by a guy named Foster Gamble, who's related to the family of that owns Procter & Gamble, partially owns Procter & Gamble. This is a very misleading movie, very slick, very beautiful visuals, very well done, but extremely deceptive film, packing about every conspiracy theory under the sun into a little over 2 hours. I call it in the blog Zeitgeist 2.0. That term has been used by people other than me as well. And it's obviously kind of an attempt to follow in the footsteps of Zeitgeist. Its main points are free energy, meaning energy devices that violate the laws of physics by producing more energy than they consume, which, of course, are not possible. The claim that these devices exist and that they're being suppressed by the government and by other forces. Then the film launches into a number of conspiracy theories, most of them what they call related to what they call the global domination agenda, which is Illuminati by another name. So I did, even before I saw the film, I did a very meticulous taking apart of the trailer itself, and that was what I posted on my blog. A lot of comments, most of them hostile. Some of them very supportive, but I was careful in my facts on... there's various people that show up in the trailer, including David Icke, the believer in these reptilian alien overlords. Absolutely ridiculous things. Deepak Chopra makes an appearance in the film. Various pseudo-scientists, people who claim to have built free energy machines, one of them named Adam Trombley, who I did a blog about on my other blog. Nazim Haramein, who makes claims about ancient astronauts, things like that have been debunked many years ago. So the Thrive trailer was quite controversial, but I felt like, particularly with Thrive being rolled out on November 11th, which has supposedly a cult significance. I have no idea what that significance is, nor do I care. But it seemed like there was a lot of promotion going into this film. And so I decided to create a new blog specifically devoted to Thrive, called Thrive Debunked. And you can see it. It's Thrive Debunked, that's all one word, .wordpress.com. And several other debunkers joined me in penning some articles, going through, taking apart the various conspiracy claims in the Thrive movie. I wrote a blog debunking crop circles. It's very clear that crop circles are not of extraterrestrial origin. They are made by human beings. We know exactly how they are made. You can see, in fact, I embedded a YouTube video showing how they're made. That doesn't convince a lot of the people in the comments who continue to claim that they must be of extraterrestrial origin, etc., etc. I'm frequently asked, well, what is it you really believe, and do you think the world is a perfect place, and why are you getting in the way of, people wanting to make the world better, and, this and that and the other. Controversial. Obviously very controversial. But what's interesting, and you'll see this, I did not, this post about the Thrive trailer was the last specifically Thrive-related blog on my Muertos blog. But if you go to Thrive Debunked, you'll see a post I made fairly recently called Thrive a Flop? And it appears that the Thrive movie is not getting the traction that its makers, I presumably, hope for. It does not seem to be going viral in the way that Zeitgeist did. It seems to have peaked already in barely 6 weeks. The Thrive movement seems to have never gotten off the ground. I think one of the main reasons is because conspiracy theorists simply don't trust the film. In my post on the Thrive Debunked blog, you can see some of the reasons for that. Foster Gamble's connection with the Procter & Gamble Corporation is one of them. Many conspiracy theorists believe that the film is disinformation created by the elite, which is absolutely laughable. There's been a controversy in the Conspiracy Underground about the poster for the Thrive movie, which shows a woman taking a blindfold off, and whenever you show anything, any picture of a person where one eye is showing or one eye is emphasized, the conspiracy theorists are going to go nuts with that, claiming it's occult symbolism and it's the Illuminati, the New World Order, rubbing it in our faces and various other completely irrational things. So, but the controversy over the Thrive poster has overshadowed the impact of the film itself, which has been minimal as so far as I can tell. Now, it's possible that it may hit a second wind, I don't know, but I'm kind of doubting it. And the reason I doubt it is actually related to a blog I posted on the Muertos blog in November called Truth About 9/11 Truth and Debunking. And this was a blog that dealt with a paper by an unofficial paper written by former JREF, James Randi Educational Forum member named Ryan Mackey, talking about why the 9/11 Truth movement, the rise and fall of the 9/11 Truth movement. And he made a very interesting point, and you'll see it in the blog, that conspiracy theories move much faster now. Through social media, things like Twitter, just the life cycle of a conspiracy theory is so much shorter now than it was, exponentially shorter. Zeitgeist peaked, it started its ascent in 2007, it peaked probably sometime in 2009. The birther conspiracy peaked in about a year or so, and then Mackey uses the deather conspiracy. I mentioned in the first podcast the death of Osama bin Laden. The conspiracy theory that he wasn't really dead or that his death had been covered up somehow was a very short-lived theory. It peaked in about a few days. And he uses that to argue that the life cycle of conspiracy theories is so much faster now than it used to be, which I think can help explain why Thrive has not been getting the traction that probably its followers hoped. Obviously, time will tell, but we'll see kind of how that plays out, and I find that very interesting. So all the Thrive stuff is now on the Thrive Debunked blog, and it's unlikely that there will be another Thrive-related post on the Muertos blog. But if you're interested in the film, go to the other blog and read all about it. December, I chose to highlight something I've been doing on my Twitter, which is highlighting missing persons cases. I did a blog called Legions of the Disappeared, real-life missing persons cases, and I profiled a number of cases. I visited a website called the Charley Project, and Charley is CHRLEY, Charley Project, all one word, .org. And it's a database of missing persons cases, not just children, not just faces on milk cartons, but actual missing children and adults. More adults go missing than children do every year, and some of these cases are absolutely baffling, and I've always been fascinated by them. So I started posting these links on my Twitter, and then that became a popular feature on Twitter, and I decided to do a blog about it. I'm going to be doing another blog about it, highlighting some other cases. Some of the cases that I focused on, and this is probably one of my favorite blogs from this entire year. It hasn't been that popular, but it's still one of my favorites. Some really interesting and also heartbreaking stories. Jordan Hall, young man who vanished from his apartment in Buffalo, New York in 2001. Famous case of Judge Crater, Joseph Force Crater, who vanished from New York City, was last seen getting into a taxi cab in August of 1930. Jeremy Bright, his story was featured on Unsolved Mysteries in the late 80s, early 90s. There's a woman out there who may still be alive. Her name is Elizabeth Ann Gill, Gill. She has been missing since June of 1965. But the authorities believe that perhaps she was abducted and then raised by someone else, and in fact, police are still looking for her. So it is possible that Elizabeth Ann Gill is still out there. Ray Griecar, the Pennsylvania District Attorney who vanished, they found his car. Jay Pringle from Medford, Oregon, vanished in the suburb of L.A. carrying a suitcase and a blanket. Very puzzling case. So all of these cases are really, really interesting, and if you read any of my blogs this year, I would really highly recommend reading the one about missing persons, because it really is fascinating. And this is something that needs to be talked about, needs to be publicized, because a lot of people go missing, and it's very difficult to find them. The reasons they go missing are very strange. I'm following a Twitter feed called Black and Missing, which is a woman who focuses mainly on African American people, particularly women and girls who go missing, and not enough attention is given to these cases. You'll see mentioned in my blog something called missing white woman syndrome, which is an unfortunate fact with our media, that missing persons are usually get more attention if they're white women or if they're young children put in what you call stranger danger. Non-family abduction, as Charley Project makes reference to it. But very, very interesting stuff. And I'm going to be doing another blog. You can follow, if you follow me on Twitter, I do 2 tweets a day on missing persons, the hashtag disappeared. So if you're interested in that, please take a look at that. Rest of December has just been some funny odds and ends. I posted a video I made with some unflattering words taken from comments left on my blog, which is just a bit of fun. There may be some unfinished business. There's a 9/11 truther who wanted me to deal with some questions, and I'm going to be posting that probably by the end of the year or possibly early next year. And I really hope to bring the debunking, at least not to an end, but perhaps to a different level, a more subtle level this coming year, 2012, than has been the case this year. So that's basically it, and I hope you enjoy the blogs, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. I don't know if I'm going to have a chance to make many more of these, but if I do, please tune in and for everyone who's clicked on my blog, everyone who's left a comment, even those unflattering comments, thank you for reading. I really appreciate it. So I hope you have a great new year, and I will talk to you later. Thanks.